Welcome to Impact Church. For service times, upcoming events, and video podcasts, please visit our website, www.impactchurchohio.com.
Now, I want to start out today by asking a quick question. I'll say hi to Joe in the back. He's with us today. How many of you have ever felt hopeless? How many of you have been at a place in your life where you just felt like things were meaningless? Like, man, what is the point? Why do I even bother? Does it really even matter anyway? I have had times in my life, and some of them were my teenage years specifically, where I just remember laying awake at night and thinking, what's the point? Like, what is all this for? Or maybe you've been outside, you don't see the stars very much when you live in Cleveland, but maybe if you're away or you're in the country, maybe you're camping out with your family, and you look up and you just see this vast canopy of sky. And in that moment, there's a sense where you just feel this overwhelming smallness, and you just feel like, what is going on? And there's no real easy answer to those questions of life, the deep things that we go through. And even in times where you've maybe experienced an easy answer, maybe this is just me, but those answers never really satisfy the questions that I have. Maybe you've gone through a horrible tragedy, or maybe someone has died, or you've received a bad diagnosis. Maybe somebody had cancer, or maybe somebody was impending, their life was ending. And even if you expect it, in those moments, easy answers don't really help. I think sometimes in Christianity, we're prone to this a little bit more. We're prone to give the easy answer. It's convenient because you say you have faith, and your faith gives you hope. And so when somebody's going through something, it's really easy to reach in the well and pull out this treasure of God or a random scripture. Maybe it's like Romans 8:38 or Jeremiah 29:11, and say, hey, God has a plan for your life. He has a hope, and He has a purpose, and you're going to get through this. And that's really easy to say as a Christ follower. It's really convenient to say in a moment of need. But if you're the person whose life is falling apart, if you're the person who's experiencing that tragedy or that trial, it's not all that helpful. It's not all that timely, and maybe it's just me. Like, you guys are probably closer to Jesus than myself, but when somebody says something like that to me and I'm actually going through a trial or a tragedy or a situation, and somebody gives me this easy answer, I'm like, wow, that's not helpful right now. Like, it may be theologically accurate, it may be biblically accurate, it may be true, and one day I'm sure I'll look back on this moment and say, you know what, God, that was all true. You had a purpose and you had a plan in that pain. But when I'm going through it, like, I don't necessarily see that. And sometimes the most helpful thing that people can do, and I understand why we're prone to give these easy answers, like, it's kind of awkward to just be present and to be silent and to be with somebody in their grief. As a husband, I'm terrible at this. My wife, hopefully she doesn't raise her hand or anything, but she could attest that she'll often have problems, and I am like the solution master. 12 years in, I still think, man, you got a problem, I have got a solution. And if I don't have a solution, I will make something up, and it'll sound right to me, and I'll just keep saying it until you do it or get angry with me, which often happens. But it's so much more helpful to just empathize, to just be with people during their pain, to just be with people during their loss. And as Christians, even more so, we don't have to have all the answers. And as difficult as it is, as against our human nature to solve as it is, that's actually so much more helpful. It's actually so much more powerful. I was thinking about the times where I've been going through circumstances and tragedy and trial and loss and grief and suffering and depression and whatever it might be in my own life. And the times where I have had the most severe loss have been those times where I'm alone, where I'm isolated. You see, the devil or the enemy of our soul, as the Bible will say, he'll try to isolate and separate. In the Bible, it refers to Christ followers as the sheep in a flock, and Jesus is the great shepherd. And one of the tricks of the enemy is to isolate the sheep, to get him over here by himself, maybe away from the herd. And in those moments, we get to these places where we just think, you know what? Why am I suffering like this? Why am I going through this? And you have this little track in your head that sometimes will say, it's because you're not good enough. Or maybe you brought this on yourself, you deserve it. You're such a sinner, like why would you expect that you would deserve anything more than this? And it's so damaging to be isolated. But then on the other end, the times when I've experienced the most healing through tragedy and trial and grief and circumstances are those times when I've just had a friend who was present. Just had a relationship to fall back on, and many times as a married person, it's my wife who, we joke sometimes that my wife and I, we balance each other out. And so if one of us is low, fortunately God has been gracious where it's not both of us, because we would go off the deep end together, Typically, in a relationship, what you find is one person is having a good week and the other person is having a bad week, and you can kind of balance each other out. It'd be nice if we were both having good weeks, but thank God we don't both have bad weeks very often, because you need a friend to pull you up. You need a friend to help you through that grief, and that can be catalytic, but it doesn't erase the tension of this problem of pain, this problem of grief. It doesn't erase the tension and the trial that you experience. It doesn't take away the pain of grief. It doesn't take away the loss that you feel. It doesn't take away the suffering. But it does give you a friend to go through, and sometimes all you got to do is talk it through. Sometimes you just need a shoulder to lean on or to cry on and just say, man, why is it so tough? Why are things going this way for me? And that's what I want to do through this series. We're starting a new series called What's This Life For? The book of Ecclesiastes. And there aren't going to be any easy answers. If you've read the book of Ecclesiastes, it is a really difficult book. It is a really interesting book. And in fact, I would encourage you all to read it. It is 12 chapters, take you about 20 minutes. And if you're not reading the Bible, man, the book of Ecclesiastes is a great place to start. And at Impact Church, we try and stress real direction for real people on a real journey. That's what we want to do. We want to connect with people where they're at and about real issues and real problems that they're going through. And the book of Ecclesiastes, I think, is a great place for that. But one of the things that's important on the front end is just having the authenticity to say, man, there are no easy answers. Life is difficult. Life is challenging. We all have different stories and circumstances and experiences that have shaped who we are. And if I was to stand here from the stage and say, this is the way that it is for each and every one of us, and I would be so far off. Because those discussions only take place in conversation. They only take place when you know the specifics, when you're with somebody to learn their story. And so if you're here today, I want you to know that you made the right decision coming to church today. I know the weather was horrendous. It was terrible. Depending what time you left your house, you may have had to fight through a semi-tsunami. Maybe you waded through and your pants are wet or your flip-flops, whatever, as mine are. But you made the right decision, because I believe this series has the potential to change your perspective, to impact your life. And I'll say this. What's This Life For? The name of the series. Before Creed was a joke, they were a pretty decent band, okay? And there was a time where we partied like it was 1999, in 1999, and Creed was probably playing on the radio. I just want to harken back to that. So as we talk about some of life's deepest questions, we're going to be looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. If you turn in your Bible with me to page 355, I believe the one's in the seat back in front of you, or if you use YouVersion, pull it up on your mobile phone. Ecclesiastes is part of what's known in the Bible as, I'm not there yet, but it's okay. Ecclesiastes is part of what's known in the Bible as wisdom literature. And as such, it's really approachable. It's really easy to connect with and read, and although we'll get there, it's a little bit depressing. It's really easy to connect with. So if you would take the book of Ecclesiastes and you would give it to somebody on the street and they didn't know what it was, very quickly I have the suspicion that they would start agreeing, that they would be about a chapter in and be like, yeah, I felt this way. I've experienced this. That makes sense. And the same is true of much of the other wisdom literature in the Bible. You have like Psalms and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the book of Job, and Song of Solomon, which is fascinating too. You should read that sometime also. Biblical scholar Walter Kaiser, he says this about the book of Ecclesiastes, and it's very long, but I have it on the screen if you want to read. Ecclesiastes is the best news around for such baffled and confused postmodern men and women. It's the book for persons who want to live again now. It's the working person's book. It answers the residual boredom and loneliness of postmodernity, modernity, I can't speak, especially for those who are tired of the routine of joyless eating, drinking, and earning a paycheck, but with no sense of any enjoyment in the whole process or even where any of it comes from, much less with what any of it means. Ecclesiastes is the thinking person's book. Its author knew that the reader is haunted by the questions, what does a person get for all his toil and struggles in life? Who am I anyway? What is the meaning of this treadmill called life? Why is there so much change, and why are there so few points of reference or any solid ground? Where can I plant my feet from which I can view the whole of life? Should I be worldlier than thou, or should I adopt a holier than thou position? Or is there this third alternative that's simultaneously world-accepting and God-honoring? I would shoot for that one, as difficult as it may be. And then finally he says, Ecclesiastes has as its central concern the basic hunger of mortals to see the wholeness of life and how it fits into a meaningful pattern where its purpose and plan is owned and directed by God. Now I'm going to read that last sentence one more time, because I know somewhere in there, if I was you, I would have zoned out, and I get that. Ecclesiastes has as its central concern the basic hunger of mortals to see how the wholeness of life fits into a meaningful pattern where its purpose and plan is owned and directed by God. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. And in Ecclesiastes, this guy will only refer to himself as the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. Many people have assumed that that means that he's King Solomon, but there are lots of people who disagree with that, and so it's possible that this was just a collection of like Solomon's writings, or that somebody else wrote it in his place, but nonetheless, it's in the Bible. So I will just refer to him throughout this series as the preacher, okay? He says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. See that? This is Debbie Downer at the happiest place on earth.
Good morning. Welcome to the Baby's Breakfast Jamboree. My name is Billion, and I'll be serving you today. You guys here on a special occasion? Well, we're here on a new magical gatherings family package. We've got the home of two-sit plan down from Ohio, right? Ohio! Great. Let me tell you Mickey specials today. We've got steak and eggs served with some home fries and Mickey waffles. I love it. Steak and eggs.
Ever since they found mad cow disease in the U.S., I'm not taking any chances. It could live in your body for years before it ravages your brain.
Debbie Downer, right? This is the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon comes. It's so encouraging to read. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. What does man gain by all his toil, in which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. See, we've all felt this at some point in our life. We've all come to a place where we just feel like, man, what is the deal? Why do I try? Why do I bother? Maybe you're doing well. Maybe you got a good job, or you're doing well in your finances. And see if you've experienced this. We don't have to raise our hands, but you're saving up some money, Maybe your bank is starting to look a little bit better. Maybe you're paying down the credit card debt if you live in America, and most of us have that. Some of us, whatever. Anyway, and you get to a place where you seem like things are going pretty good. And maybe you even take a minute to feel good about yourself. But then what happens? We even have a name for it. We call it Murphy's Law, right? You're saving up some money, and then all of a sudden your car breaks, and you take it in, and they say, hey, there's $7,000 worth of damage and lots of parts that you didn't even know were on an automobile, but you need them now. And suddenly your rainy day fund that you were saving up is gone, and you think, what did I do to deserve this? What is the cause of all this? Maybe you've experienced this. Maybe things are going pretty well, and if you've ever saved up and took a big family vacation, maybe I'm the only person who's experienced this, but you go and you get to Disney World with your family. You've saved for 6 months to get there, and you're like, this is going to be amazing. We're going to go to Disney World. It's going to be great. And as soon as you get in the car and start driving home, has anybody else felt this like sense of emptiness? It's like the trip, you put so much effort into it on the front end, and it just didn't deliver what you expected it to. Everything could go well on the trip. Nothing, you didn't lose any kids, and Disney World was okay, but you get back and you're just like, that was it. Like, Disneyland's the happiest place on earth, and I spent so much money, but I feel a little bit empty inside. It didn't deliver the promise. Some people have said that you shouldn't read the book of Ecclesiastes until you're 40. I can't vouch for that because I'm not 40, but some of you are, okay? And so maybe you're in this place where you're having like this midlife crisis, and you're saying, man, when I read Ecclesiastes, I get what he's talking about. I understand that. I'm like, preacher, you are reading my mind. This makes so much sense. What is the point? Why do we bother? Why do we try? When I was 25 is the new 40. I think that's backwards. But when I was 25, I had graduated college, and I had gotten my master's degree. And I had worked for a long time to get this master's degree, and no sooner than I think at the same moment that I received the master's degree on stage, as they handed it to me, I just felt really depressed. It was kind of demoralizing. And so I went through what was like a quarter-life crisis. This is becoming more popular. I like to claim responsibility for some things, though. So when I was 7, I invented communism and then found out it was a terrible idea. But as a 7-year-old, I was like, this is going to solve everything. It'll be great. We'll just share. And then when I was 25, I invented the quarter-life crisis, which is probably not a good thing to invent, but apparently it's all the rage now. People are doing this a lot. Like at 25, a lot of young adults hit a place in their life where they're just feel an overwhelming sense of depression, a sense of dread and grief and commiserating with Solomon or the preacher of, what's the point? Why are we even here? Solomon goes on in verse 11, and he says, and actually I'm skipping some verses, so in 11, there's some remembrance in former things, or there's no remembrance in former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to come among those who come after us. We spend our whole lives believing that our life is the most important thing. We spend our whole 60, 70, 80, 90 years just worrying about, man, what is Ryan going to do today? How this day is going to be epic. What am I going to do to seize the moment? It's so important. And the preacher says there's no remembrance. One day it's gone in an instant, and it's over. If you've ever gone to a funeral, and if you haven't, you will soon, but most of us in this room have probably attended a funeral, right? You go. And there's a moment in every funeral, and even as a pastor, I've officiated a few, like, there are times where you just feel this overwhelming sense of grief and vanity. Like, man, what is the point? This person in the casket, whoever it was, is somebody's loved one. It's somebody's relative, somebody's family member, and yet in an instant, in the blink of an eye, it's all over. And the best we can do is have a room full of 60, 70, 80, if you're really well loved, maybe like 200 people show up and say, oh, that's sad, he's dead. And then it's over. And many funerals, if you go to many funerals, are much sadder than that. They don't even have people who show up at them because oftentimes as we age, people people forget about us, or we burn bridges, or maybe we didn't live our lives the way that we wanted to. And you get to the end, and it's a room of sadness and grief. Mark Twain said it like this. He said, "The world laments you for an hour, and they forget you forever." It's so sad. Solomon, or the preacher, I'll say, will go on in verse 12. "I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. And I've applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that's done under heaven. It's an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I've seen everything that's done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind." I should have queued up the Debbie Downer song. I will butcher the microphone and say it now. Wah, wah. Like, there's just sadness. And he gets to the end and he thinks, maybe you're still tracking with him and you're reading through the first 11 verses and you think, well, maybe that was his experience, but I am Ryan. I've got this thing figured out, okay? I've got a beautiful wife and my kids are pretty solid. And you know what? It's going to be good. And he says, no, I've tried it. I was the king and there was nothing that I kept my heart from, that I didn't desire, that I didn't have. And it's all emptiness. It's all vanity. We see this so often with celebrities, with Hollywood. Most of us in the room probably aren't uber wealthy or uber rich, but there's something within us that desires that, right? We all think, you know what? Robin Williams couldn't handle it, but if I had his money, I wouldn't have his problems, okay? I would be like, I could do it. I have a plan. I know what I would buy, and it would make me happy. And then we read something like this that says, no, it wouldn't. I mean, maybe temporarily, maybe you would enjoy it a little bit, but stuff can't satisfy long term. It's like this whole first chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. The preacher is just trying to depress us. And as I was reading, as I was studying, I found out that he does a pretty good job, because I was like, this week I was kind of depressed, okay? Because you just read, it's a little sad. It's a little depressing to think about it. It's a little depressing to read him say, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. It's here one day and it's gone the next, and you think about death again, and it's true. People live and people die, and we honor them for an hour and then we forget them forever. You go by cemeteries, and it doesn't matter how nice your tombstone is. At the end of the day, somebody visits it once a year, And how many people's tombstones get visited, even that once a year? Cemeteries are just depressing places. And over the next 5 weeks, as he is trying to, in this first chapter especially, to just get us to take some perspective, as he's trying to get us in touch with this depressing mentality, we're going to look over the next 5 weeks at some examples that this preacher will tell us that he tried. Some different areas of his life that he said, you know what, I looked at this, I looked at that, and it was vanity too. And then I looked over here, I tried something else, and you know what? Same thing. It was vanity too. When my wife and I, we get into heated discussions, I will say, is the proper stage term. We get into heated discussions. I kind of do this a little bit. When I think that I have a point, what I like to do is just keep reiterating my point. And I don't need any advice from her. I'm sure she is irritated by it, okay? But sometimes I'll even get louder about it, and I just think, man, if I can just get her to see my perspective, if I can just keep saying this point, because I know it's such a good point, that she'll come around and she'll know what I'm talking about. She'll understand it. I'm going to go on the record from experience and say that doesn't often happen. It doesn't often play out the way that it does in my head before I speak, and then I speak, and I'm like, I can't get those words back. But sideways discussion. I think the author of Ecclesiastes is doing something very similar here. You read through, and it seems like, man, you are depressing me. I get the point. Like, you think life is vain. You think it's all not worth. But he just keeps hammering it in because he really wants us to get his point. He really wants us to reflect on our lives and to take a bit of perspective about it. And really, you get the sense that this is an older guy looking back at his life and saying, you know what? I'm going to die soon. My time is coming, and I've been to some funerals too, and I don't want to be the guy who leaves it all on the table. I don't want to be the guy who you say, man, this is such a shame. He was 60, she was 70, 80, all this life experience, all this wisdom, all this knowledge, and it's just gone in the blink of an eye. We all die. And you get the idea that this guy is writing this and he's screaming, listen, you're going to die too. You're going to die too. You need to reflect on your lives. Reflect on how much time you've had and how much time you have left and how you're using the time that you have now. You and I, as we read this, I think that message is equally as relevant no matter where you are. Like, how are you using the time that you have? We all pick a path in life, and typically that's even when we're like 18 or 19, we don't know what we're doing, but at some point you're like, I'm going to be a doctor, or I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a chemistry teacher, or a rocket scientist. And we pick this path, and more often than not, we get kind of stuck in that path. There are people who make changes, but often it's like swimming against the stream, right? Once you're in something, you start seeing the American dream, and you're like, 40 more years. If I just keep my head down, if I just stay here, I can retire with that pension, and then one day I can enjoy it. One day I'll get there. And he's writing and just saying, you don't know what tomorrow holds. You could die next week. You could die 10 years from now. Maybe when you get to retirement age, your company will cancel the pension because they can do that, and increasingly more are doing that. Or maybe you won't even have your health or your faculties when you get there. You need to live for the moment, but you need to live wisely and reflect on it. The underlying narrative we get through this whole book as you're reading, 29 times this guy will say, everything under the sun is vanity. Everything under the sun it's vanity. I looked and I tried and I tasted and I saw everything under the sun, and it's all chasing after the wind. It's all vanity. But I believe what he's not saying is equally as important. In that moment when he says that everything under the sun, there's this implicit underlying current that there's something else, something that's not under the sun. And he says that everything under the sun is vanity. But what if there's more? What if there's something else? What if there's something that's not under the sun? What if there's something that's not vanity? What if there's a God who isn't beholden to the same rules as us, who doesn't die, who doesn't toil for 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years, 110 by the time I'm old, right? They have machines, magic, I don't know. What if there's more? In fact, I think there's another question that he's wanting us to look at too. I would say the first question would be that, what if there's more, as you consider things? And the second question, is the stuff that you're living for going to last? Because through the book, he'll talk about some different stuff, and some of it doesn't last. Wealth and finances and experiences and relationships, even those things don't last forever. I'm going to end with this illustration. There's a Chinese character. If you've ever written in Chinese or seen Chinese writing, they're mashups of these characters, right? And little pictographs. And Matthew, if you would come up, I'd have you do that. The Chinese character for the word crisis is actually a combination of two characters. And many of you have probably heard this illustration made famous by JFK back in like 62, before his life was tragically cut short, right? And the character for the word crisis is made up of two. And the first one is danger, and the second character, they smush them together, is opportunity. And there's this beautiful word picture that in every crisis, there's danger and there's opportunity. There's a potential to fall off the rails. There's a potential to be crushed and demoralized and depressed from it. But there's also a potential to see the crisis and to respond positively, to change, to move forward, to live for more. And I believe as the preacher in Ecclesiastes, and we'll see over the next couple weeks, as he is a bit of a Debbie Downer. It's a bit of a depressing book. Like, if you're going through depression right now, man, I'll see you in like 6 weeks or something. I don't know. Because there is something about reading it where you're just like, it gets me right in the feels, right? I understand what he's saying, and it's kind of hard to see where the positive is in this. Why do you keep saying it's all vanity? But I believe he's trying to spur us on to reflect on our life, to gain some perspective and say, you know what? There is more. There's more. I've tried it. You've tried it. We've all experienced trying to solve our unhappiness, our loneliness with stuff. You get a new car and it's awesome. Your new car smells really good for like 2 weeks and you're like, this is the best car I've ever owned. And then what happens? Somebody T-bones you at a red light and then you're back to driving whatever your insurance will let you, okay? Stuff doesn't satisfy. It doesn't satisfy. We try. Or maybe you've gone through a season of life where you were unhappy and stuck in your depression, and maybe you tried to numb the pain with alcohol or drugs or pharmaceuticals, and it seems good for a short season. Seems good for a window. Maybe you forget your pain. Maybe you take the edge off your pain and you seem like you're enjoying it. It doesn't last forever. One day you wake up and you realize that you're twice as unhappy as you were when you started. But what if there was more? What if there was hope? And what if that hope came through the person of Christ? If you bow your heads with me, I'm going to close in prayer. Heavenly Father, I pray today that you would help us to connect with these questions, to apply them to our lives, not just today, not just in this moment, God, but to live our lives with the wisdom of a heavenly perspective. Jesus, it's so easy for us to make a commitment to follow you. And maybe we do good for a season or maybe a couple of years, but there comes a time where, like that song that we sang earlier says, we forget our first love. We lose our perspective. We lose the original relationship or the original meaning. God, I pray that your words would jumpstart our hearts, that we would reflect on them, that we would turn back to you if we need to, God, that we would commit to you more fully from where we are, that we might move one step closer, and that as we read your word through the book of Ecclesiastes or whatever we're doing in our personal life, God, I pray that we would connect with you in a way that would make our relationship that much more real, that much more powerful and compelling. If you're here today and something I said or something with the book of Ecclesiastes resonates with your spirit and you'd like me to pray for you, nobody's looking around, but you can just slip up your hand so I know who you are, and I'll pray with you. We all have tough times. We all have problems. We all have circumstances that are so out of our control. But there is a God, and he is faithful. Holy Spirit, for each and every person in this room, I pray that you would empower us. Guide us to live a life that resembles your Son. Fill us, Jesus, with living water that would flow forth and impact those around us. And when times get tough, God, I pray that you would surround us with your children, that the church of Christ might be there, that we might shine light in the darkness, that we might be present and willing to listen and to empathize and to help one another move forward with faith and hope. In Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed this week's video podcast. To attend one of our actual services, please visit our website for service times and location. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, Twitter, and subscribe to our Vimeo channel. Please return for our next week's video podcast.